James Carville knew how to win, and he blamed the Democratic losses this November 2nd on stupid wokeness, to which AOC fired back that wokeness is a term almost exclusively used by older people these days. So that should tell you all you need to know. What? This is a term folks like you brought out very recently and had been proudly displaying at every march since. Just last year, The Guardian declared woke the word of our era. I guess they didn't get the memo from the Mean Girls Club. We don't use that emoji anymore. Woke, please. We say fetch now.
That was Bill Maher calling out AOC for denying the reality of wokeism and, in his view, undermining the country. You'd think that after losing the elections, the DNC might finally adjust course and move toward the center. But no, its leading voices, especially AOC, appear intent on doubling down and pursuing woke politics to the bitter end.
That said, I would love to have AOC on this show. There's so much to admire there. I was one of her first supporters for the Green New Deal idea. But that will probably never happen because Democrats don't go anywhere these days where they're not pre-adored. And that's my last bit of advice to them. Go where the amen corner isn't. Do Fox News. Be brave. Come here. Go everywhere. Winning is about expanding the electorate.
And Maher isn't backing down one bit. Welcome to today's video, where he takes apart AOC woke arguments with full force. Buckle up, folks, this one going to be fiery.
What a great strategy, never missing an opportunity to remind voters how lame and clueless and hopelessly uncool they are, especially since those are the ones who actually vote. But okay, fine. What word would you like us to use for the plainly insane excesses of the left that are not liberalism, but something completely different? Because you can't have that word liberal from us and think it should cover things like canceling Lincoln and teaching third graders they're oppressors. That's all your new thing.
Here's where things get interesting. AOC doesn't seem worried about being woke, she worried about being called woke. It's the political version of saying, I'm fully on board with this ideology, just don't use the embarrassing label. So even when she tries to downplay wokeness, she still comes across as unmistakably woke. And that's exactly what Maher is pointing out. He's not just criticizing her word choice. He's calling out the whole circle of self-styled woke activists who insist they're simply progressives, even as their positions drift far from traditional liberal ideals. Maher's argument is straightforward. Liberalism once stood for open debate, practical thinking, and genuinely engaging with the public. But with AOC and her ideological allies steering the ship, he believes, it morphing into a hypermoral, hypersensitive movement that barely resembles the liberalism it claims to champion.
A more pertinent question to ask about the word woke might be, why in such a short time has it gone from a rallying cry to a pejorative? If the word only made you think of rational, deserved causes like teaching a less whitewashed version of American history, AOC would still want to own it. But it's a joke because it makes you think of people who wake up offended and take orders from Twitter, and their oversensitivity has grown tiresome. That said...
Exactly. In this view, politicians like AOC and Bernie Sanders no longer reflect the classic liberal values built on free speech, open discussion, and practical problem solving. And ironically, they don't even embody the original meaning of woke, which once referred to staying aware of real, concrete social injustices. Over time, the term has been stretched and reshaped into a banner for a set of more extreme ideas that many everyday people don't feel connected to at all. What began as a call for awareness has evolved into a kind of cultural performance, one focused less on justice and more on satisfying a small group that seems perpetually offended. Instead of prioritizing policies that materially help working-class Americans, the movement, as critics like Maher argue, becomes consumed with language rules, niche ideological fights, and purity tests no one asked for. And that, Maher suggests, is why the current woke agenda feels so out of touch with traditional liberalism and with the concerns of ordinary people.
That said, I would love to have AOC on this show. There's so much to admire there. I was one of her first supporters for the Green New Deal idea. But that will probably never happen because Democrats don't go anywhere these days where they're not pre-adored. And that's my last bit of advice to them. Go where the amen corner isn't. Do Fox News. Be brave. Come here. Go everywhere. Winning is about expanding the electorate.
Anyone who's been following this channel over the past few months knows this isn't the first time Maher has challenged Democratic leaders to come on his show. He practically rolled out the red carpet, extended open invitations, and repeatedly urged them to show up, yet they rarely do. And to critics, the reason seems obvious. They know Maher isn't going to flatter them or let their talking points glide by unchallenged. Yes, he's a Democrat, but he's the kind of Democrat who still values hard questions, real debate, and calling out nonsense when he sees it. That alone makes him radioactive to today's overly sensitive, highly curated political class. They understand that sitting across from Maher means he'll press them on contradictions, highlight gaps in their rhetoric, and potentially unravel their woke narratives in front of a national audience. So instead, they steer clear because appearing on Maher's show would mean confronting realities they'd rather avoid.
You can give the people all the goodies Joe Manchin will allow, and it doesn't seem to buy their love. Why? Why is the party that supports so many issues that benefit the middle class still considered out of touch by 62% of Americans? In plain English, nobody likes a snob. Hillary Clinton didn't have anyone on rural research or outreach when she ran in 2016 until the race tightened just before the election. Then they hired one. And where was his office? Brooklyn. True story. Politics is local, not locally sourced. It's not artisan. It's art and Stan.
These days, the DNC often seems more invested in political theater than in tackling the issues that genuinely keep everyday Americans up at night. Instead of zeroing in on the concerns of the average vote, they appear to cater to the loudest voices on the far left, voices that don't necessarily reflect the priorities of their broader base. Maher has tried reminding them of a basic political reality. Politics isn't meant to be abstract or performative at local. It's about showing up for the people who elected you, listening to their concerns, and addressing the real, bread-and-butter problems that shape their daily lives. Yet this idea seems to sail right over the heads of figures like AOC, who critics say are more absorbed in ideological skirmishes than in practical governance. Maher's frustration is straightforward. If Democrats want to regain public trust, they need less performance art and more problem-solving. Right now, he argues, they're getting that balance entirely wrong.
Your microaggression culture doesn't play in the Rust Belt. If a staffer hands you a speech that says menstruating people instead of women, don't say that. Say women. Don't put anyone fresh out of college in charge of the campaign. They've been given participation trophies their whole life. They don't know how to win.
Maher continues laying out, point by point, what he sees as the woke missteps that contributed to the DNC's losses, and he doesn't sugarcoat any of it. He points to the party handling of language around gender, arguing that attempts to replace long-standing terms like women with clinical phrases, such as menstruating people or birthing people, left many Americans feeling alienated rather than included. To Maher, expecting everyday voters to adopt this terminology overnight was unrealistic and politically tone-deaf. He also criticizes what he views as the spread of a radicalized education culture, where, instead of emphasizing resilience, standards, and genuine achievement, schools lean too heavily on participation trophies and lowered expectations. In his view, that mindset seeped into politics, activism, and even the workplace. Maher goes further, arguing that hiring decisions sometimes prioritized identity categories over merit, a shift he believes voters clearly noticed. In his assessment, these aren't minor errors, they're examples of ideological overreach that left the party disconnected from practical concerns and, ultimately, from the voters themselves.
Yes, I know every fiber of your being tells you the people you really want to reach are Guatemalan teenagers and bloggers in Gaza, but they can't vote. To a lot of folks in America, you come across as the cares about everybody but me party. And it doesn't have to be that way. You can find ways to stand up for these folks without being David Duke. This month, when the Democrats finally passed their big $1 trillion bill to rebuild our roads and bridges, 6 Democrats voted no because it didn't go far enough to address climate change, which I'm sure is true. What does? But this was free money from the federal government that would actually improve their constituents' lives. I can see a voter saying, you know, squad, I agree with you on climate change. But as long as it is happening, we also need money for getting the water pumped out of the subway.
Critics argue that today Democrats often seem more energized by causes abroad than by the struggles facing people in their own communities. They'll rally passionately for civilians in Gaza, organize heartfelt events for teenagers in Guatemala, and draft statements supporting communities in Afghanistan. Yet when it comes to decisions that directly affect American families, issues like jobs, safety, housing, and the rising cost of living, their response can appear slow, hesitant, or bogged down in ideological disputes. Maher highlights one example frequently raised by his supporters: a major funding package Democrats opposed because it reportedly lacked climate-related provisions. To critics, rejecting the entire bill rather than using it to address immediate problems, crumbling infrastructure, overwhelmed cities, financially strained households, felt like prioritizing symbolism over practical relief. Their argument is blunt: Democrats could have taken the funding, dealt with urgent domestic needs, and then returned to push for a separate climate-focused bill. That, they say, is what pragmatic politics looks like. But in their view, today Democratic leadership is so committed to ideological purity that they treat compromise as betrayal even when Americans are the ones paying the price. And voters, Maher argues, are clearly noticing.
And then there's abortion. A difficult issue for the Democrats to lose on. But they're trying. For decades, liberals have said if only men could get pregnant, this wouldn't even be an issue. And abortion rights are women's rights. Well, that's wrong now. Or as the kids say, hold up. When the wokey end of the progressive spectrum talks about abortion now, they shy away from that word, women, and prefer terms like birthing people or people who menstruate, because somewhere there's a trans man who's pregnant, and I say good for him, and I'll be looking for his story somewhere in a future issue of Ripley's Believe It or Not.
According to critics, the woke ideological wave hit its peak when some far-left activists began asserting that men could become pregnant, a claim that many people found confusing or at odds with their understanding of biology. The release of a pregnant man emoji only intensified the debate, with skeptics viewing it as ideological theater rather than a reflection of medical terminology, which typically distinguishes between cisgender men and transgender men. The public reaction ranged from puzzled to outright skeptical, with many raising practical questions about how the conversation had drifted so far from their everyday experience. But rather than engaging with those questions, critics argue that segments of the far left responded with outrage, treating even polite disagreement as intolerance or bigotry. In their view, discussion wasn't welcomed, compliance was. Dissent, they say, became a cancelable offense, and anyone who hesitated to adopt the newest vocabulary risked being branded anti-progress. For many ordinary people, this was the moment when the movement felt less about inclusion and more about ideological enforcement, an ever-shifting rulebook that they struggled to keep up with.
Last week, an 85% Latino congressional district on the border with Mexico, which had always voted heavily Democratic, flipped to the red team. And the campaign manager for the losing Democrat said, "We gave up a reliably Democratic congressional seat for no reason at all. We deserve to know why." Well, aside from your terrible attitude, I'm going to tell you why. Because these voters stopped seeing your candidate as their lawyer. That's why. Their message to you was, I'm an American now. I'm here. Be my lawyer, not the lawyer for the migrants showing up in my backyard.
In the end, Maher takedown isn't just about AOC, evolving terminology, or ideological theatrics. about what he sees as a Democratic Party that has drifted so deeply into performative politics that it's lost touch with the people it says it represents. Critics argue that the party has veered from everyday concerns, whether on issues of biology, education standards, or prioritizing global causes over local struggles, and has sometimes rejected practical solutions simply because they didn't line up perfectly with ideological goals. To many, this far-left approach has created a political atmosphere that feels disconnected from the experiences of ordinary Americans. Maher's message is blunt: when a party focuses more on appeasing fringe activists than addressing real-world problems, voters inevitably turn away. And critics believe that's exactly what happened. They argue the DNC didn't lose because Americans became heartless or uninformed, but because leaders ignored practical realities, dismissed dissenting voices, and treated common sense as something suspect. If Democrats want to rebuild trust, Maher says, they need to move away from language policing, step back from ideological rigidity, and reconnect with the concrete issues affecting everyday people. Until that happens, Maher and others will keep sounding the alarm while voters continue sending their own messages at the ballot box. And that wraps up today's video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more content like this.